We are in the middle of one of our main series for the year called The Way of Jesus. The Way of Jesus. And today our focus is on working and resting. Jesus, throughout his life, did some amazing things. And not just the miraculous things, but the things in which he brought love and hope and joy and peace into the world around him. And we want to live life like that, but sometimes we try to do what Jesus did without embracing the kind of lifestyle that he lived. And if we're going to abound in the good fruit of Jesus, then we need a kind of trellis upon which the fruit of the Spirit can abound in our life. And so we want to take up these rhythms, this lifestyle of Jesus, so that his fruit can pour into the world around us. And one of those rhythms is working and resting. And maybe a great place to begin is in Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 6 that says, "Better is a handful of rest than 2 handfuls of toil and striving after the wind." Work is good. Sometimes we can kind of think of work as like a consequence of the fall because we think of the curse of the thorns and the labor. And so we think maybe work is a consequence of this fallen world and we just have to put up with it, but that's not the case. In the very beginning, in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2, God blesses humankind with the glory of work, of good, meaningful, purposeful work. But at some point, work can become not something that we gain satisfaction and fulfill our purpose and meaning through, but it can become an effort of striving. Our work can turn into striving. And when that happens, it becomes this crushing, unbearable weight that is like this yoke that chafes on our shoulders. And one way of thinking about this is the story in Greek mythology that's known as the myth of Sisyphus. The myth of Sisyphus. It's the myth of this great king, this king who duped the gods into trickery, and as a result, as a consequence, his curse was to roll this great stone, this great boulder up a hill, and every time that he got near the top of this great mountain, it would roll back down to the bottom, and he would pick it up again, roll it to the top over and over and over again, on and on for eternity. And some of you, maybe upon hearing that story, are like, yeah, that's kind of how life seems. It kind of seems like just rolling this stone up a hill over and over again. Sunrise, sunset, I keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, and it's just pushing the boulder up the hill. And I imagine that every one of us could write something on that stone. What's written on that stone for you? Maybe it's a combination of things. It's a demanding job, it's family obligations, it's the piling up of yard work and household chores and busy schedules that seem to fill up, especially this time of year. Or maybe it's real suffering. Maybe it's a terrible burden. It's serious grief. It's the weight of depression. It's rising anxiety. And you wake up and maybe you hit your head on the pillow at night and you're praying, Lord, I pray that when I wake up the next morning, when I wake up tomorrow morning, I pray that this great boulder, this stone is somehow taken away, is somehow removed. And yet we wake up to just push that boulder again. But in the 20th century, there was one philosopher who came along that maybe had some hope about how to solve this great problem of the Sisyphus stone. Albert Camus posited this idea that maybe what we need to do in order to shake off the curse of Sisyphus that we all find ourselves stuck in from time to time, or perhaps throughout our whole life, is you just need to imagine Sisyphus smiling. That's all you need to do. That in order to bear up the burden of what seems like a meaningless, purposeless life, of pushing this boulder up the hill, you just need to imagine him finding some kind of happiness in the weight of it. And for some people, that's what we have tried to do. In fact, I think broadly as a culture, this is what we've tried to do. We push our burdens, our weariness, our toil uphill again and again, day after day. all while pretending that we're just as happy as can be. We push the burden of responsibility, of weight, of depression, of anxiety, and whatever else is written on that stone for you, all while plastering a smile on our face. And the result of that is crushing. The result of that is crushing. It crushes you. If you're pushing that boulder up the stone, it crushes you. It crushes your family. It's affecting your relationships in a way where you are tired and exhausted and burnt out, and you have no emotional bandwidth to share with the people around you. And it's hard to even delight in the things that you once took so much joy and peace in. And it's crushing your relationship with God. And so this is one way to live. This is one way of life, and maybe it's a way of life that's very descriptive of American culture. But Jesus offers, of course, a much better way. And there is no better verse than what's been the theme of our series when he says in Matthew 11:28, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and I'm lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke, it's not like that stone, it's not like that boulder. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And so in contrast to pushing that boulder up the hill, Jesus says there is a way to live your life in which your soul, the totality and essence of your being, lives as if it is truly at rest. In a word, what I think Jesus is promising to us is Sabbath. What Jesus is promising to us is this amazing, beautiful gift of Sabbath. Now, I want you to try and picture in your mind what Sabbath meant to the Hebrew people. When Jesus makes this promise of Sabbath rest, this triggers in their mind a certain image, and it's an image in which an entire day, the seventh day of the week, was devoted to this rest, but not rest from just exhaustion and weariness, but rest for enjoyment, for delight, for enjoying the people around you and delighting in God's good creation. It was a day when everybody was off, a day when no one worked, not even the household slaves, not those who worked your land, not even the beasts of the field. The land itself was completely at rest. And over time, there was cultivated all kinds of celebrations and rituals that would go along with this day that filled people with a sense of joy and peace and abundance. And so when Jesus promises rest, this is what the people have in mind. But we should recognize something that perhaps some of you this morning are scratching your head and thinking, okay, Sabbath, I thought that was Old Testament. I thought we broke away from that. That's old news. We've moved on. And in a sense, you're right. This is what Paul says in Colossians 2. He says, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food or drink or with regard to festival or new moon or Sabbath. These are just a shadow of the things that are to come, but the reality, the substance belongs to Christ. And so there is a sense in which those old rituals and covenant codes are done away with, might not be the right way to put it, but they've been fulfilled. They've culminated in their essence in Christ. But what Christ does is he doesn't come along, he is not rejecting the law, he is realizing it. He is the fullness of it. He is the fullness of the Sabbath. And that's why he says in Mark 2 in verse 27, as the Pharisees come and question him for his disciples picking grain on the Sabbath, his response to them is, the Sabbath was made for man. And I want that to just sink into our minds for a moment. Jesus is not just echoing a command that was offered to the Hebrew people after the Exodus. This is rooted in something that goes, as we'll see, all the way back to the very beginning in Genesis 1 and 2. that God has woven into the rhythm of the world and our reality a rhythm of rest. And Jesus says Sabbath was made for man as a gift. Not, he says, man for the Sabbath. In other words, it's not about this perfect timekeeping and ritualistic code and following all the Pharisaical demands of the day. But then he says this, it was made for man, and then he says, so the Son of Man, Jesus himself, is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is King of Sabbath rest. And so Jesus, he comes along not to erase the Sabbath, but to, in a sense, intensify it. No longer is Sabbath about a single day with special regulations. Today, Sabbath is a person. Or maybe we could put it like this: Sabbath is whenever. It's not bound to a particular day or time or rule keeping. Sabbath is whenever we stop to rest in the work of Jesus, our Creator and our Redeemer. This, for us, is what the Sabbath is ultimately all about. And so I want us to keep that in mind, that Sabbath is ultimately a person. I'm going to talk in a sense of how we maximize this beautiful gift that's given to us. And the danger that I think we have is in realizing that the Sabbath is ultimately about Jesus, it can become so abstracted that we never find time in concrete reality to actually partake in it. And so throughout the rest of the lesson, I'm going to speak as if we need a Sabbath. And for you, that might mean a 24-hour day. That might mean Sunday. That might mean Saturday. That might mean Monday. That might mean something very different for every one of us. But at the heart of it all is this reality: resting in the completed work of Jesus, our Creator and our Redeemer. And so the question that we want to get at is essentially this: how do we Sabbath well? I think we recognize the need for it, but how do we Sabbath well? And maybe before we go anywhere else, what we need to recognize is this is not just a good idea. According to the Creator of Sabbath himself, this is absolutely vital. I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but when you look through the Ten Commandments, the command that's given by far the most attention, about 37% of the words that make up the Ten Commandments, right in the center of it all is the command of the Sabbath. And it's so essential that what I want us to see is this: in the Ten Commandments, it is as wrong to violate the Sabbath as it is to steal, to lie, and to murder. Let that sink in for a moment. How strange and interesting is it that God, when he gives these commands, these 10 commandments to the people of Israel, it is as wrong to violate this Sabbath principle as it is to steal and lie and murder. And maybe by the end of this lesson, we'll come to understand exactly why that is the case. And so, as we think about how to Sabbath well, I think it starts with recognizing, first of all, that the Sabbath is a day of dependence. It's a day of dependence. The Sabbath is first kind of instituted for the Hebrew people in Exodus chapter 16. And it's when God gives the direction for collecting manna. Now, Lawrence already hinted at that this morning when he talked about the maggots that would appear within the manna if you tried to store up extra on the first 6 days. But on day 6, you could gain twice as much. God would offer an abundance of manna so that on the 7th day, the people could rest. And here's how it's put. He says, 6 days you're to gather it. But on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, you can imagine how some people didn't get the memo. Nevertheless, some of the people, they went out on the 7th day. And then God says, bear in mind. He says, bear in mind, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. And I want you to hear those words. He's given you the Sabbath. Long before it was a command, it was a gift. And he says, that's why the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. And so the people rested on the seventh day. What I want us to see in this is that Sabbath is an invitation to trust in God. It's to trust that He will provide, that the world doesn't revolve around all of my needs and my ability to meet those needs, that I can lean back and trust that if I stop, the power of God will allow the world to keep going, and I'll still be abundantly provided for. I remember my little cousins growing up, they were always wanting over time to kind of do more and more things for themselves. You remember that phase, like with your kids, or maybe when you were a kid, you start to gain that sense of independence and responsibility. It's like before junior high when you don't want responsibility. But it's that phase where you want to take up things for yourself and do things and prove that you're helpful and capable and you don't need anybody else to help you. And so here we would be on vacation and I could quickly take all the luggage up the stairs, but here's little Brody who just wants to prove himself. And so he's dragging his suitcase step by step by step all the way up to the top. Why? Because he wants to prove that he can do it. He wants to prove that he can do it all by himself. And that's great in some ways. We need to learn responsibility. We need to learn hard work. As Paul would say in Thessalonians, if a man doesn't work, let him not eat. There's value in work, but at some point, over time, our whole life can become absorbed with trying to prove ourselves through work and responsibility. Got any Enneagram 2s or 3s? Some of you will appreciate this. The Enneagram is like this personality test. You have the helper, who's number 2 on the Enneagram. Some of you are smiling about this. And you have the achiever, Enneagram 3. And this, I think, perfectly captures the essence of those personalities. That we want to help. We want to provide for other people. We want to be seen as bearing up the load of others. And yet, if we're not careful, it can equally become a vice when our sense of self-worth becomes so wrapped up in what we do. Either because the more that we achieve, the more powerful we feel, the more esteemed we feel, the more worthy we imagine ourselves to be in the eyes of other people, or because we simply want to prove ourselves to be helpful. That if people just see me as helpful and hardworking and providing for them, then maybe I'll be liked, maybe I'll be loved. And there may be any number of other reasons why we get caught up in the rat race of work and striving and toiling. But what I want us to see is that the Sabbath, in short, is a day in which we let go and let God. It's a day in which we're reminded that our worth is not tied up in our work, and that the weight of the world does not rest upon our shoulders. We can let go, and we can let things go. We can let the chores pile up and say, it's going to be all right. We can let the responsibilities and family obligations that seem to just weigh down on us, we can say, it's okay to say no. And in the hustle and hurry and busyness and an era when it seems like families in particular are pressured to take on more and more and more, it's okay to say, our family's stepping back. We don't see the same value and purpose in all of the busyness as the culture does around us. In an image, it's much like Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, consider the birds of the heavens and the lilies of the field. They go about their work and they gather their food into their nests, and they spin and toil in that field, and they're clothed with splendor and glory, and yet they're not worried. There's dependence. There's trust that God is in control, and we can depend on Him. I love the way that John Mark Comer puts this in his book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which which I know many of you have read, and I think it's a great book. But he says this, he says, the Sabbath comes every 7 days to remind us of the goodness of our life with God in all the seasons of our lives. And don't we need that? He says, including the ones that don't feel very good. Sabbath comes at the end of a great week and at the end of a lousy one. When we finish all of our to-do lists and when we're woefully behind, when all is well and when life is falling apart. And he says it's to remind us it's okay when we're not okay. He continues on, in those seasons of the dark night where our prayers are unanswered and our dreams are over, when we feel God's absence more than we feel his presence, Sabbath comes, and with it, a sense of our peace, of trust in God, despite our circumstances and not because of them. This is the gift, the good gift of Sabbath, a rhythm that comes and breaks up the busyness and hustle culture, the craziness and chaos of our everyday lives and toil of each week. And it says, the stone that you're pushing uphill, I'll take that on my shoulders so that you can rest. So that you can find joy and delight, not because of your circumstances, not because everything is perfect and going well, and you've put things exactly as you want them because you've just worked so hard to earn it, but in spite of your earning it, he gives us this day of rest. And so it's a day of dependence. But the other thing I want us to notice is that it's a day of deliverance. It's a day of deliverance. Deuteronomy 5 and verse 15 is in the middle of the reiteration of the Ten Commandments when Moses speaks these commands to the people again. And it says in verse 15, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. He says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. I love that image. It's like God is reaching down and pulling them out of slavery and into rest. And he says, therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe this Sabbath day. So it's a gift and it's this command saying you need this. Now, I don't know if you remember, but Pharaoh was not a very great guy, putting it mildly. He was not a very good dude. He enslaved the Hebrew people, of course, but it was for the purpose of building these storehouses of grain and goods, of the things that would delight the king. And when they asked for some time off, when they asked to go into the wilderness, when they sent into HR for some family vacation, he doubled down and he took away their straw in order to make brick and still demanded that they produce the same amount of bricks, the same quota, forcing them to roll that stone up the hill. No breaks, no rest, no peace. And what it communicates is this. What Pharaoh, this tyrannical, oppressive ruler, communicates is that your worth is reduced to your production. Your worth is only about what you can produce, what you can achieve, what quota you can hit. And so we cannot overstate enough how cruel, tyrannical, oppressive, self-seeking, violent, evil, and ruthless this king was. And what I want us to notice is that God institutes the Sabbath, if for no other reason than to say, I am not like Pharaoh, and you are not like slaves. And we need to appreciate this. God rescues them with his outstretched arm out of the house of slavery, and he brings them into the wilderness. And what's the command that he gives? It's not a burdensome command. It's light and easy, like that easy yoke that Jesus promises to us. And it's all for the purpose of telling these people who've been stuck in this vicious cycle of rolling a stone up a hill for these 400 years, I am not like Pharaoh, and you are not like slaves. And that message is just as needed for us. Sabbath reminds us that we are not a slave to the things that oppress us. We're not a slave to work, and more than that, we're not a slave to success. We're not a slave to achievement. We're not a slave to security. And God is not like Pharaoh. Our God sees us as his beloved. He delights in us. He rejoices in us, and he wants to give us rest. And this, I think, is why Jesus heals so many on the Sabbath. Sabbath is in Jesus' mind, a day in which people are released from the things that oppress them in order to be restored to life and abundance. And so that's what we experience when we take up this Sabbath principle. It's an act of resistance. It's an act of rebellion against all that enslaves us. It removes us from scarcity into abundance. It frees us from the chaos and stress of the week into a time of peace. It removes us from distraction in which we're never on the same page with the people that we love, and allows time to rest in deep connection. It does away with striving and toiling and gives us true satisfaction in which we delight and rejoice in the good things that God has put in our hands without seeking anything more. It takes away comparison and envy, in which we look around at other people and say, maybe if I just work a little harder, I'll get what they have. It removes us from this consumer culture and instead replaces our hearts with a heart of gratitude at everything that God has provided for us. And it frees us from apathy, from just this mundane sense of meaninglessness into wonder at God's good and amazing world. And it moves us from despair, hopelessness, to become a people of unbounded joy. Sabbath is a day of deliverance. And that leads into the final thing, and that is Sabbath is a day of delight. A day of delight. And this, I think, is what maybe we need to see more than anything else. Back in Genesis 2 is the first time that we see this idea of the Sabbath, when it says that God, that the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array by the seventh day. God had finished the work he had been doing, and so on the seventh day, he rested. He rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, if we're not careful, that can sound like God is resting from exhaustion, just like we would. But this reveals to us something that Sabbath is about more than just resting from exhaustion. It's resting for enjoyment. And as an analogy, in fact, it's a far more fitting analogy than maybe we realize at first glance. It's almost as if God is inviting us to share in the delights of his house. On days 1 through 3, God creates this house, and then on days 4 through 6, he fills it with good, delightful, beautiful abundance. And it's like on day 7, God says, come to my house. He invites humanity in to that house to share and delight in this good, amazing world. It's a day of delight. In fact, it's actually in the name that God gives it. You remember, Eden means garden of delight. And so this is what Sabbath is about. It's a sanctuary in time. It's stepping back into the garden of delight. But we might wonder, how so? What does that look like? Well, Dan Allender, I think, does a great job articulating this. He says, Sabbath is a holy time. It's a holy time where we feast and play and dance and make love and sing and play and laugh and tell stories and read and paint and walk and watch creation in all its fullness. It says few people are willing to enter into that kind of Sabbath and to sanctify it and to make it holy, because a full day of delight and joy is often more than any of us can bear in a lifetime, let alone a week. What I want us to hear in those words is just how difficult it is for us to experience all the delight that God wants for us. It reminds me of Psalm 34 in verse 8, when David says, "Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. See how much he loves you. See how much he cares for you. See his abundance in all of creation that he's given over to your hand." And for many reasons, there might be occasions and specific reasons why we fail to keep the Sabbath, but I wonder if the biggest reason is that we just can't imagine that God would actually want this for us. Does anybody feel that? I am amazed over these short years of preaching at just how hard it is for us to believe that God really loves us. And Sabbath is a day for us to rest in that abundant joy and delight that the Father has over his children. I think part of our struggle is this: we struggle to believe the Lord is good because we just don't savor him long enough to see it. And so Sabbath is an opportunity to take up the words of David, to taste and see that the Lord is good. And that means more than just a metaphor. I think that means literally delight in creation. And all the things that Dan Allender mentioned, all the goodness of God's created world and the abundant blessings that he's bestowed upon us. Receive those. Set aside time to rejoice in all of these things and savor them. And so it's a day of dependence, a day of deliverance, a day of delight. And maybe we see why Sabbath is just so important. I think Sabbath is so important because without the Sabbath, we reject God's goodness and we will ruin our relationships. And maybe that sounds dramatic, maybe that sounds over the top, but I don't know how it could be any more over the top than God putting it in the center of his 10 commandments. It's recognized that if you don't take up this way of life, if you don't live out this Sabbath principle, it will crush you. You will slowly find that you have no capacity to love God anymore because you've turned him into Pharaoh. You've turned him into a tyrant in which he just demands more and more and more of you, and you have to take on all these religious responsibilities while also trying to fulfill your everyday life. And that will begin to ruin the relationships with the people that we love the most. But in contrast to that, I can't help but notice that at the center of these commands, on either side of it, is the first 4 are about loving God, and the latter 6 are about loving our neighbor. And right in the heart is this principle of the Sabbath, as if to say, by keeping Sabbath, we grow to love God and love our neighbor well. And this is what the way of Jesus is ultimately all about. We love God and we love our neighbor well. Everything that we do, everything that we take up about Jesus' life and lifestyle and his rhythms are about becoming a people of love. And there's perhaps no more transformative practice in our lives that we could take up than this practice. To taste and see that the Lord is good. And in doing so, we grow to love God and love our neighbor well. And so how do we Sabbath well? Well, maybe we could put it like this. First of all, we need to stop, we need to savor, and we need to see. Maybe for you, this is a full day. In fact, I think that's maybe what the early church encourages us to consider, that we would take a full day of rest to delight in God as our Creator and our Redeemer. But maybe it's different for you. I would encourage us to at least think about Saturday night. Maybe Saturday night, as you wind down or as you have this meal together, that you take a moment to stop everything. There's no schedule, there's no agenda. Saturday night dinner time is the time in which you set aside, that you appoint as holy, that you stop. And maybe you even invite others into that. But you stop and then you savor. You savor the things in which, the ways in which God has delivered you, the ways in which he has brought you into deeper dependence and trust, and all the ways that he has brought you delight. And as we do that, to the degree that we savor the goodness of God, the more that we will see the steadfast love of the Lord, the more that we'll come to see that we are not slaves and God is not Pharaoh, that we serve a good and loving Heavenly Father who's not some workaholic, but when Saturday rolls around or whenever your appointed time is, he wants nothing else than to delight in us, his children. And what I believe we'll see more than anything else is exactly the words of Jesus that he spoke for us on the cross when he said, "It is finished." All of the work, all of the stone that we pushed uphill, Jesus says on the cross, the work is complete. There's no more striving. There's no more toil. There's nothing else that you need to add. Jesus says, it's finished. The work is complete. Or to echo where we started, Jesus is the one who rolls away that Sisyphus stone. That whatever's written on it for you, Jesus has taken it upon his shoulders. He has rolled that stone away. And I love the way it's put by Justin Earley when he says, Jesus, he stayed up all night in Gethsemane so that you could sleep. He finished his work on the cross so that you could rest. He let the world break him so that it doesn't have to break you. And he rose. He rose so that all your aspirations won't end in the grave. This is the hope that Jesus invites us into. This is the way of Jesus, the way of Sabbath rest. And so this morning, there may be some here who've not yet come to the King of Sabbath, who've not yet come to the King of Delight and united your life with him. And if you want to do that now, we give you that invitation. We echo the words of Jesus, come to me and he'll give you rest. And that first step is to enter into this water, to be forgiven of our sins, to have that stone of our sin and shame rolled away and our life united with him. And we'll begin to experience true soul-filled rest. If we can help you in any way, come now as together we stand and as we sing.